I didn't think much of it at first. The first sign, it was just a moment. A single fleeting detail that slipped past me like a shadow in the corner of my vision. A locked phone that was never locked before. A half-second hesitation when I asked who she was texting. Nothing to go to war over. But war doesn't start with cannons. It starts with whispers, with small moves on the board, until you realize the game has been playing you the whole time. Jessica and I had been together long enough that I knew her routines, and I knew when something was off. Lately, she had been different. Not in an obvious, dramatic way. No tearful confessions, no lipstick on collars, no mysterious credit card charges from hotels. No, Jessica was too careful for that. It was in the subtleties. The way she suddenly cared about her appearance in a way she hadn't before. The way she lingered in front of the mirror a little too long. The way she left the room to answer phone calls with the screen tilted away from me. I still told myself I was imagining things because I wanted to, because the alternative was unbearable. And then last night happened. She left in the early evening, saying she was going out with her friends. Normal. She did that sometimes. But there was something different about the way she said it this time. Too casual, like she had rehearsed it. She left in jeans and a sweater. She came back in that dress, a deep striking red that I had never seen before. I don't know why that detail stuck with me so hard. Maybe because it didn't fit the story she had told. Maybe because it felt like a deliberate statement. She wobbled slightly as she entered, the smell of perfume and alcohol swirling around her like an aura. Her phone was clenched tightly in her hand, and she made sure to tuck it into her purse the second she saw me looking at it. She didn't seem guilty, didn't seem nervous. If anything, she seemed amused. I stood in the middle of the living room, just watching her. She smirked. Smirked. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she asked, kicking off her heels with an exaggerated sigh, rubbing her neck like she just survived a long, exhausting day. I didn't answer. My eyes were locked on the dress. That dress didn't belong to the woman I married. That dress belonged to someone else. A different version of her. A version I wasn't supposed to see. "You look nice," I said finally, my voice neutral. Jessica laughed, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "I know, right? Thought I'd change things up a little." "Funny," I said, tilting my head. "Because you left in something completely different." A pause. A flicker of something across her face, gone as soon as it appeared. She was good. She had practiced this. "Oh," she said, shrugging. "Lisa spilled wine on my sweater. She let me borrow this." Lisa, her best friend, a name she always threw around when she needed a convenient excuse. I almost laughed at how quickly she reached for it. I stepped closer, close enough to smell something beneath the perfume. A scent I recognized but had no business being on her skin. "Lisa's?" I asked. "Strange. Fits you perfectly." Jessica's eyes met mine. And for the first time, I saw it. The crack. The moment where the mask almost slipped. Then she smiled, slow and lazy, reaching up to run a finger along my jaw. "Are you jealous?" she teased, her voice light, like this was a game, like I was nothing more than an amusement to her. I smiled back. She had no idea I already knew everything. She didn't notice the shift in my expression. Or maybe she did and chose to ignore it. Jessica had a talent for pushing boundaries just far enough to test reactions, but never far enough to face real consequences. She was waiting for me to crack, to demand answers, to accuse her outright. But I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. Not yet. I forced my voice to stay casual. "Where'd you and Lisa go?" Jessica stretched her arms above her head, like she had just survived a 12-hour shift at work. "Just a couple of bars. You know how she is, dragging me from place to place. Honestly, I lost track of time." She yawned for extra effect. "I need a shower." I let her go. Let her slip into the bathroom, let the water start running, let her think she was safe. And then I walked straight to her purse. Jessica wasn't dumb. She kept her phone locked, but that didn't matter. She wasn't expecting me to look through anything because she thought she had me under control. Her purse smelled like spilled liquor and something floral that didn't belong to her. I ignored that, went for her keys, her wallet, a napkin with a phone number scrawled on it, a man's name. Then I found the receipt. She had been sloppy. Or maybe she had been too drunk to care. A printed receipt from some high-end cocktail lounge downtown. Time-stamped at 11:47 p.m. The name on it wasn't Lisa's. It was under a reservation for Derek. I leaned against the counter, staring at the receipt. Derek? Who the hell was Derek? The shower turned off. Steam curled out from under the bathroom door as Jessica emerged, wrapped in a towel. Her wet hair slicked back. She smiled at me like nothing in the world was wrong. Better? I asked, holding up the receipt between two fingers. Jessica barely glanced at it before her expression turned deliberately blank. What's that? You tell me? I said, watching her reaction carefully. She walked past me, not even trying to take it from my hand. No idea. Probably Lisa's. Lisa's? I repeated. Because it's funny, Jess, this Derek guy must be real generous, putting drinks on his tab for you and Lisa. She didn't even flinch. That was what scared me the most. How effortless the lies came to her. Oh right, she said casually. Lisa ran into some guy she knew, and he insisted on covering the bill. Right, I said slowly. And you just forgot to mention it? Jessica rolled her eyes, finally turning to face me. Are you seriously interrogating me over a drink receipt? She laughed, shaking her head like I was pathetic. Jesus, you're acting like a jealous psycho. There it was. The deflection, the manipulation. She wanted me to react. She wanted me to get defensive, to back down, to tell myself I was being paranoid. Not this time. I took a slow step forward, dropping my voice just enough to make her pay attention. You want to try again? Jessica's smile faltered, just for a fraction of a second, but I saw it. You're insane, she muttered, moving past me toward the bedroom. I didn't stop her. I didn't argue. I just let her go because I wasn't looking for an admission. I was looking for a weakness, and I had just found it. Jessica thought she had won. She thought that by brushing me off, rolling her eyes, and calling me crazy, she had successfully killed the conversation. That was her strategy. Shut things down before they had the chance to breathe, make me feel ridiculous for even questioning her. But I wasn't playing her game. I didn't say another word about it. I let her stomp off to the bedroom, let her bury herself under the covers like she was the one exhausted by me. I even climbed into bed next to her, forcing my body to stay still while my mind ran in 1,000 directions. I heard her breathing steady out. Felt her shift onto her side, away from me. She was already done with it. Another lie, another cover-up. Another night where she had successfully gotten away with it. I stayed awake. When I was sure she was asleep, I reached for her phone. Jessica was smart enough to keep it locked, but she wasn't smart enough to realize that I had already watched her unlock it before. The way her fingers moved, the way her thumb hovered over. I had seen the pattern twice now, and tonight, I was putting that knowledge to use. I swiped up, tapped in the code. The phone unlocked. For a second, I just stared at it, my own reflection staring back at me in the dim glow of the screen. My heart was hammering in my chest, my hands ice cold. I knew what I was about to find. I knew, and I still wasn't ready for it. I went to her messages first. Nothing suspicious, no text from a Derek, no conversations that seemed even remotely questionable. But Jessica was careful. Too careful. I opened her deleted messages, and that's when I found them. Long, drawn-out conversations. Some from weeks ago, some from tonight. All with a number that wasn't saved under a name. A number that had been wiped clean after every interaction. But the messages were still there. I scrolled. The first few were harmless, boring even. Then they got bolder, flirty, suggestive, explicit. Then my eyes caught on something. A message from earlier that evening. Wearing red, just like you wanted. Hope you're ready. I swallowed the acid rising in my throat. Kept scrolling. Can't stop thinking about last time. You're unbelievable. I forced myself to keep reading. Leaving now. I'll meet you at the bar. My fingers tightened around the phone. My wife. My wife had walked out of this house tonight, telling me she was going out with Lisa, and the whole time, she had been getting dressed for another man. She had been wearing exactly what he wanted. I set the phone down carefully. My pulse was roaring in my ears, but I couldn't afford to wake her up. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about confronting her anymore. This was about making her pay for thinking she could outsmart me. I barely slept. My mind wouldn't let me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that text again, wearing red, just like you wanted. Hope you're ready. Jessica had planned everything. The dress, the lies, the way she'd waltzed back in here like she had done nothing wrong. And the worst part? She wasn't even afraid of getting caught. She thought she had me wrapped around her finger. She thought I was stupid. She thought I wouldn't dare do anything about it. By the time morning came, my decision was made. I wasn't going to explode. I wasn't going to beg for an explanation like some desperate idiot. I was going to do something far worse. I got out of bed as soon as Jessica's alarm went off. She stretched, groaning, acting like she hadn't been sneaking around behind my back. "Ugh, my head is killing me," she muttered, rubbing her temples. I glanced at her. "Hungover," she scoffed. "You wouldn't understand. You never drink." That was her little way of dismissing me. Like the fact that I didn't get blackout drunk with her meant I was somehow less than just the boring, predictable husband she kept around when it was convenient. I only smiled. "You should take something for that headache. I'll make breakfast." Jessica blinked, surprised. She wasn't expecting that. She was expecting tension. A fight. A reaction. She got up and stretched. "Yeah, okay. Thanks." I headed to the kitchen and started cooking, making everything exactly how she liked it. Eggs, toast, coffee with way too much cream. I wanted her comfortable, unbothered, thinking she had won again. While she was in the shower, I grabbed her phone. It was unlocked. Careless. She must have thought I was too stupid or too trusting to ever look through it. She hadn't deleted the number. I opened her messages and found his name at the top, Derek. I read through them again, my stomach twisting with every message. She had told him how much she missed him, how she couldn't wait to see him again, how I was so clueless and she had nothing to worry about. I exhaled slowly, then typed a message. "Last night was unforgettable. Let's do it again, but I want to surprise you. Where should I meet you?" I hit send. Then I deleted the message. By the time Jessica walked into the kitchen, wrapped in a towel with wet hair and zero shame, my phone buzzed in my pocket. Derek had responded. "You're amazing. Can't wait. Same hotel, same room, 8 p.m. I smiled. Jessica sat down at the table, sipping her coffee. "This is nice," she said, like she hadn't been lying to my face for months. "We should do breakfast together more often." I looked at her, at the woman who had betrayed me without a second thought. The woman who thought I was just another clueless husband, too naive to see what was right in front of me. And I smiled wider. "Oh, we definitely should," I said, because tonight she was going to walk into that hotel expecting Derek, and she was going to find me instead. The day moved painfully slow. Jessica had no idea what was coming. She carried on like everything was normal, humming to herself as she got dressed, checking her phone with the occasional smirk, like she was getting away with something. I played my role perfectly, calm, unbothered, completely unaware. When she left for errands, I knew exactly what she was really doing. Making sure everything was set for tonight. Making sure I had no suspicions. Making sure Derek was still waiting for her. Except Derek wasn't going to be the one waiting. I arrived at the hotel an hour early. It was a high-end place, the kind she would never go to with me, the kind she reserved for men like Derek. The receptionist barely glanced at me when I walked in. I already knew the room number, room 618. I took the elevator up, my heart pounding with something dark and electric. This wasn't nerves. This was control. For the first time in months, I wasn't the fool in the dark. I wasn't the one being played. I was holding the cards now. Outside the door, I waited. 30 minutes passed. Then 40. And then, at exactly 7:58 p.m., I heard heels clicking down the hall. Jessica. She didn't knock. She used the key card. Derek must have given it to her earlier. I stepped back into the shadows of the room. She walked in, her back to me, adjusting her hair. She had dressed for him, tight black dress, expensive perfume, every detail calculated to please another man. She still hadn't noticed me. I let the door shut with a soft click. Jessica froze for a moment. There was only silence. Then slowly, she turned around, and when she saw me standing there, her entire face collapsed. She didn't scream, didn't gasp, but I saw it. The absolute pure panic in her eyes. I smiled. Expecting someone else? Jessica's mouth opened, then shut. Her hands twitched at her sides. She was scrambling, her brain running 1,000 miles per second, trying to figure out how the hell I was here. I gave her a second to speak. She didn't, so I stepped closer. Go ahead, lie to me, Jess. Tell me why you're here. She swallowed hard. Her face contorted into something almost believable. Shock. Confusion. A poor attempt at innocence. What are you doing here? She whispered. I tilted my head. That's funny. I was about to ask you the same thing. Her throat bobbed. I cut her off, stepping even closer. She backed up fast, bumping into the bed. I stared her down, watched her squirm, let the silence stretch long enough for her to feel it, to choke on it. Then I pulled out her phone, unlocked it, opened to Derek's messages. The very last message, the one she thought she sent to Derek, made her face drain of color. And that's when she knew she had walked straight into my trap. Jessica stood there motionless, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. I watched as her mind raced, scrambling for an escape, an excuse, anything that could get her out of this. But there was no way out. Not this time. I held up her phone, my thumb hovering over the screen. The text messages between her and Derek were still open. The proof, right there in front of her. I could see the moment she realized it. I had set her up, and she had walked right into it. Her lips parted, but no words came out. For the first time in a long time, Jessica was speechless. I let the silence sit between us for a moment before I spoke, my voice calm, almost casual. I have to admit, Jess, you really had me for a while. You played your role well, loving wife, innocent smiles, the little annoyed sighs every time I overthought things. I took a slow step toward her. But you got sloppy. Jessica's mouth snapped shut. She inhaled sharply through her nose and straightened her shoulders. Her posture shifted into defense mode. This isn't what you think, she said quickly. Too quickly. I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. Oh, please don't insult me. I tilted my head. You were meeting Derek tonight in this room, wearing that dress, the same way you dressed up for him last time. I gestured toward her phone. Hell, you even texted him about it. Except, funny thing, you weren't texting him. You were texting me. Jessica flinched, her nostrils flaring, but she wasn't denying it. She knew there was no point, so she switched tactics. You don't understand, she said, her voice softer now, desperate. I was just meeting him to tell him it was over. I raised an eyebrow. That's interesting, because this doesn't really sound like someone trying to break things off. I turned her phone toward her and read aloud. Wearing red, just like you wanted. Hope you're ready. I let that sink in before adding. If that's how you dump people, I've been doing it wrong my whole life. Jessica's jaw tightened. I could see the frustration in her eyes, the way she was barely holding it together. She was trapped, cornered like a rat. Then, in true Jessica fashion, she did what she always did when she knew she had lost. She got mean. Fine, she snapped, crossing her arms. You want to hear it? Yes, I was meeting him. And guess what? I don't regret it. I stared at her, waiting. She wanted a reaction out of me. I wasn't giving her one. Her lips curled in anger. Maybe if you weren't so boring, I wouldn't have had to look for excitement elsewhere. There it was, the venom. The desperate attempt to flip it back on me. I took another step forward, lowering my voice just enough to make her listen. You think I care about what you say now? You think anything you say can change what's about to happen? Jessica faltered. I saw the brief flicker of fear in her eyes because she realized, finally, that this wasn't just some fight she could manipulate her way out of. This was the end. Jessica's confidence cracked. For the first time, I saw something close to fear in her eyes. Not because she was afraid of me. No, she had spent years convincing herself that I was harmless, weak, too predictable to ever do anything drastic. But now she was seeing a side of me she didn't recognize. A side of me she had created. She took a slow step back, her back almost against the wall. Now what? She muttered, folding her arms across her chest like a petulant child. You're going to what? Yell at me? Lecture me about marriage vows? Her lip curled in disgust. You can't even handle me. And that's why I had to find someone who could. I smiled slowly. Her words were meant to hurt, but they didn't. Not anymore. Not after everything I had read. Not after everything I had planned. I lifted her phone again, scrolling through the messages. I let the silence stretch just long enough to make her sweat. Then I said, So, Derek? She stiffened. I nodded toward the bed. This is where you were going to do it, huh? Right here with him. Jessica exhaled through her nose. It's none of your business anymore. I tilted my head. That's funny because I'm pretty sure I made it my business when I texted him from your phone. Jessica froze. Her body went rigid, her face draining of color so fast, I thought she might pass out. What? I let her panic settle in before continuing. I told him to meet you a little earlier. I wanted to make sure we had some time to talk first. I checked my watch. Should be any minute now. Jessica's eyes darted toward the door so fast, it was almost comical. You wouldn't. Would you? Her hands clenched into fists. You have no idea what you just did. Now that was interesting, the way her voice shook, just a little. Why? I asked, taking a slow step toward her. Because you're worried about him? Worried about what he'll think when he walks in and sees your husband standing here instead? Jessica swallowed hard. You don't get it. No, you don't get it. I cut her off. This is your mess, Jessica. You made this bed. Literally. So go ahead. Tell me, what's Derek going to do when he walks through that door? Run to your defense? Get in my face? I smirked. Or is he going to take one look at this disaster and realize you're not worth it? Jessica's jaw locked so tight, I thought she might shatter her own teeth. She looked at the door again, then back at me, something wild flashing in her eyes. And then she bolted. She lunged for her phone, trying to snatch it out of my hands. I was faster. I yanked it back just in time, and she stumbled, barely catching herself against the bedpost. Give it back, she hissed. I held it just out of reach. Why? So you can warn him? I chuckled. You really don't get it, do you? It's too late for that. Jessica looked at the door again. This time, really panicking. Because she knew, just as well as I did, that Derek was on his way up to mine, and for the first time all night, I saw something close to pleading in them. She knew she had lost. She knew she was seconds away from everything falling apart. I smiled. Go on, Jess. I stepped aside, gesturing toward the door. Open it. She didn't move, so I took another step closer. Or should I? Jessica inhaled sharply, her eyes darting between me and the door like a caged animal. Then suddenly, she spun on her heel and rushed toward the bathroom. Coward! She was trying to run, trying to hide. I grabbed her wrist before she could slam the door shut. Where are you going? I murmured, dragging her back just enough to see the sheer desperation on her face. I can fix this, she whispered, her voice trembling. I leaned in close until my lips were just beside her ear. No, you can't. Knock, knock, Jessica. Derek called again, more impatient this time. I pulled away and smiled. Guess you better let him in. Jessica shoved me hard enough to make me take a step back. Then she turned, smoothing down her dress, plastering on the fakest smile I'd ever seen. I almost had to admire it. Even now, she thought she could control the situation. She pulled open the door. Derek stood there, tall, smug, ready, dressed too well for someone who wasn't trying to impress another man's wife. His smirk faltered the second he saw me standing there. And that was the moment he realized he had walked straight into a trap. For a moment, the room was dead silent. Derek's smirk vanished so fast, it was almost funny. His eyes flickered from me to Jessica, then back to me, confusion twisting into something darker. Realization. Jessica, to her credit, tried to recover. Derek, she breathed, her voice higher than usual. I can explain. Explain what? I cut in smoothly. That you lured him here under false pretenses? That you played both of us like fools? I turned to Derek, watching his expression shift from confusion to anger. Not at me. Her. Derek was not the type of guy who liked being played. His jaw flexed, his hands curling into fists at his sides. What the hell is going on? He asked, his voice sharp now, laced with irritation. I shrugged. That depends. What did she tell you? He stared at Jessica, waiting for her to speak. She didn't. She couldn't. She was caught, and she knew it. So I answered for her. She told me she was going out with her friend Lisa last night. I tilted my head. I assumed she told you something different? Derek's face hardened. Bingo. Jessica shot me a warning look, silently begging me to shut up. I smiled at her. She told me she was meeting you tonight. I continued, watching Derek carefully. Told me she wanted to surprise you. That she was wearing exactly what you asked for. That she couldn't wait. Derek's mouth pressed into a thin line, his face darkening, his eyes narrowing on Jessica. You said you were leaving him, Derek said, his voice low, controlled. So that was the lie she fed him. I laughed under my breath. She told you that, huh? I turned to Jessica. Funny because she never mentioned divorce to me. Not once. Derek's entire body tensed. You said you were done with him, he said, his voice sharper now, edged with betrayal. You said you were just waiting for the right time. Jessica's face twisted, her mind scrambling for a way out. I just... Derek cut her off with a humorless laugh. Oh, I get it now. You were playing both of us. He shook his head, taking a step back. Jesus, Jessica, you're a piece of work. She panicked. Then I saw it in the way she reached for him, in the way her voice changed, turning sickly sweet, dripping with manipulation. No, Derek, listen to me. He yanked his arm away from her like she was toxic. No, we're done. Jessica staggered back like he had slapped her. Wait, she gasped, her voice cracking for the first time. You don't mean that. Derek scoffed. You think I'm going to stick around after this, after you lied to me this whole time? Jessica looked like she might throw up. For the first time all night, she wasn't in control anymore. Derek turned back to me. His expression was unreadable, but there was something close to respect in his eyes. You set this up, didn't you? I smirked. Just returning the favor. Derek nodded once. Then, without another word, he walked out the door. Jessica stood there shaking, staring at the empty doorway like she could will him to come back. She turned to me, her eyes wide, furious. This is your fault, she hissed, her voice shaking. You ruined everything. I laughed right in her face. No, Jessica, you did. And for the first time, she knew it. Jessica stood there, chest rising and falling in sharp, uneven breaths, her hands clenched into fists, her nails digging into her palms so hard, I half expected them to draw blood. But she wasn't angry at herself. She wasn't ashamed. No, she was furious at me because I had won. For the first time in her life, Jessica was on the losing end of her own game. She had spent months thinking she was untouchable, thinking she was smarter than me, better than me, 2 steps ahead while I stumbled in the dark. And now she was standing in the ruins of everything she had built. And there was no one left to blame but herself. I let the silence sit between us, let her drown in it. Then, finally I spoke. "You're pathetic." Jessica's lips parted like she wanted to throw something back at me. But I saw it, the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, because she knew, for the first time, that there was nothing left to say. "You had everything," I continued, my voice calm. "A husband who trusted you. A life you didn't have to lie about. And you threw it all away." I shook my head. "And for what?" "Some guy who didn't even want you once he realized what you really are." Jessica flinched. I stepped forward, close enough to see the rage and humiliation fighting for control on her face. "You thought you could have both of us. That you could lie, cheat, and come home to a husband who would never question you. You thought I was weak." I smirked. "That was your first mistake." Her jaw clenched. "You don't get to act like you're some kind of saint." Her voice shook. "You spied on me. Set me up. Tricked me." I laughed. "Tricked you, Jessica? You did this to yourself. You lied. You snuck around. I just finally made you face the consequences." Jessica swallowed, her throat bobbing as she fought for some kind of control. Then she exhaled sharply through her nose and switched tactics. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice soft now, almost gentle. She reached out, but I didn't move. "We can fix this. We don't have to end things like this." Unbelievable. Even now, with everything laid out in front of her, she was trying to pull me back in, trying to manipulate me into being the fool again. I smiled. "You still think you have a chance, don't you?" Jessica's fingers twitched at her sides. I shook my head. "You're not special, Jess. You're not some brilliant mastermind. You're just a liar who finally got caught." Her eyes darkened. The sweetness disappeared in an instant. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I chuckled. "No, but you will." She opened her mouth, probably to throw out one last insult, one last desperate attempt at control, but I was already done with her. I grabbed my jacket, walked to the door, and didn't even look back as I stepped out. And just before I closed it behind me, I said, "Oh, and by the way, I already talked to a lawyer." Jessica sucked in a sharp breath. I met her eyes one last time. "Have fun explaining this to yours." Then, without another word, I walked out of her life.